since you went away, I ain't been doing nothing. Love is somebody, and that somebody loves you back.
So Taaz saw us off. It was like on Thursday evening.
And Teddy had rode with us that time. It was strange, but he was on the bus with us.
Teddy Pendergrass had it all: fame, fortune, and a voice that could make anyone weak in the knees. But behind the scenes, betrayal, a murder mystery, and a life-changing accident that still sparks debate. This story isn't just about music. It's about power, secrets, and the twist that made his life feel like a real-life thriller.
The look that I got from both of them, I was like, this is not right. Instead of feeling some kind of regret, I'm looking at...
So, Teddy has been through some stuff that would have broken most people. He walked away from Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes when he was on top, and the critics swore he'd flop. Then, just when he was proving them wrong, things took a dark turn. His manager, Taaz Lang, was shot right in front of her house. The case still unsolved. According to Teddy, he wasn't about to question why things happened. He admitted they had been more than just business partners at one point, but by then, it was strictly work. And while he said he was sad to see her go, he made it clear it wasn't going to slow him down. If anything, it pushed him even harder. But let's just start with what happens before Teddy meets Taaz, because that's important to this story. Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes weren't always the soulful hitmakers everyone remembers. Back in the day, they were just a bunch of guys from Philly trying to make it big, calling themselves the Charlemagnes. Over time, the name changed, the lineup kept shifting, and they had some small wins, but nothing major. Then the 70s rolled around, and everything flipped. Signing with Philadelphia International Records was like hitting the jackpot. The label was run by two guys who basically had the golden touch when it came to soul music. Their style was all about blending rich, fancy instrumentals with real emotion. But the real game changer? A young drummer named Teddy Pendergrass. He wasn't just keeping the beat. He had a voice that could shake a room. Deep, gritty, and full of fire. He ended up taking over as lead singer. And suddenly, the group had that sound. Smooth, but raw. Classy, but straight from the heart.
He started out as the lead singer for Melvin and the Blue.
Their first song with the label got some love, but it was the next one that put them on the map. That's when Teddy went from just another talented singer to the guy everyone was talking about. Money started rolling in, the fame hit, and suddenly he was living the life he always wanted. People in the industry knew his voice was magic, and even one of his bandmates straight up admitted that without Teddy, the group wouldn't have made it. He wasn't just a part of the success.
Ever since you went away, I ain't been doing nothing.
He was the success, but of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Behind the scenes, Teddy was getting fed up. No matter how much work he put in, it felt like he wasn't getting the respect or the cut he deserved. And the biggest problem? Harold Melvin himself. Instead of looking out for the group, Harold seemed more focused on making sure he stayed in control. Teddy wasn't about to let that slide. One night in LA, things hit a breaking point. The group was performing at the Playboy Club, and Harold got into it with management. Next thing they knew, they were paying for their own hotel stays, while Harold was living large. The rest of the guys were struggling, so they asked Teddy to talk to him about helping them out financially. But when Teddy went to Harold's room, what he saw sent him over the edge. Harold was sitting there, surrounded by stacks of cash, laughing and spending like nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, the rest of the group could barely afford to eat. That was it. Teddy was done. He wasn't about to let himself get played anymore. He walked away from the group, and the second he left, things started falling apart. Some of the other members even followed him out the door. Harold wasn't happy about it. He even tried to intimidate Teddy into staying, but there was no stopping him. Teddy was ready to do his own thing, and nothing was going to hold him back.
You're the only.
Also, when Teddy Pendergrass bounced from Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, the group was basically shifting into a two-lead singer setup, and Teddy was set on being one of them. But like I said earlier, more than that, he felt like his paycheck wasn't matching what he was bringing to the table. And if there was one thing he wasn't about to do, it was settle for less. So he dipped. Then came Tasmaya Melanie Lane. She wasn't just beautiful, she was smart, well-connected, and stacked. And at that moment, she was exactly what Teddy needed.
Was one of the most important relationships in his life, is how he had put it to me.
Taaz was deep in Philly's high society scene, a certified IT girl in black elite circles. She was a mom, a daughter, everybody's favorite. She had her hands in business, modeling, and had already been married once. Her ex, Israel Izzy Lane, a former running back for the Eagles. And thanks to that connection, she had no problem moving in celebrity spaces, rubbing shoulders with all the right people. Taaz was cool with a lot of names you'd recognize. Dionne Warwick, Nancy Wilson, the list goes on. But let's get back to the fact that she had money, because that was a game changer for Teddy when they met. He was struggling, and she was out here running things, pulling in celebrity clients at her mom's salon. Dionne, Nancy, Lola Falana, and more. Teddy clocked that real quick. He needed her, and he put in the effort to not just get her attention, but win her over. And it worked. They started dating, and before long, he was living in her house.
I knew Taz pretty good, you know. She had a beauty shop, like, you know, talkative, make it happen kind of lady, you know what I mean?
Isn't that one of the shops that we rehearsed at in the basement?
One of the shops we rehearsed.
Teddy saw her network and knew she was the key to turning things around. So he went all in, begging her to be his manager and asking her to throw some money into his solo career. Taaz said yes to both. She even pulled out $15,000 to help him start Teddy Bear Productions, which, for reference, would be a whole lot more in today's money. On top of that, she drafted up a management contract to make it all official.
And yeah, she was a good girl, but she was firm. She was very firm.
Oh, extreme.
According to the deal Teddy signed, all the money from his first album, tour, and merch was going to be handled by Taaz under Teddy Bear Productions. As his manager, she was supposed to get 10% of his debut album earnings and a single share in the company, where she took the title of Vice President, and that was supposed to be it. Or at least, that's what Teddy thought he was agreeing to.
We signed an agreement. I was not very happy after I realized what I had done. I had given her a percentage of any renewals of my contract. That was stupid on my part.
But here's the thing. Teddy was a singer, not a legal expert. Turns out that contract gave Taaz way more than he realized. Yeah, she got that 10% from his first album, but she also locked in 10% from all his future albums. On top of that, she was set to take a cut from any business move he made down the line. By the time Teddy figured it out, he was livid. Too bad he didn't catch the fine print before signing, because now he was stuck and desperate to find a way out. Taaz wasn't budging. She wouldn't cancel the contract, and she wasn't even open to tweaking the terms. And then came the night that changed everything. Teddy had been venting for a while about that lopsided contract, the one that seemed to benefit Taaz way more than him. And on the night everything went down, he just so happened to be out of town.
So Taaz saw us off. It was like on a Thursday evening.
And Teddy had rode with us that time. So strange, but he was on the bus with us.
After a long day, Taaz was on her way home with JoJo Times, who worked as Teddy's stage manager. He pulled up to her house, let her out, and as she was heading inside, JoJo said he needed to grab something from the trunk. Out of nowhere, a gunman jumped out from the bushes and shot Taaz once in the chest. That was it. She didn't even get a chance to react. She was gone, just like that. She was only 31.
And as soon as he got into town, he went to make a phone call or whatever, and he was informed that Taaz Lang had been shot, killed, murdered.
She had poured everything into getting Teddy's solo career off the ground, but she never got to see it happen. She was just 2 months before his debut album even dropped. The whole city was shaken, and the police were scrambling to figure out who was behind it. Just 5 days later, her family laid her to rest. Jesse Jackson gave the eulogy, and Teddy even sang at the funeral. But let's just say, not everyone was feeling his presence. People were throwing him some serious side eyes, including Jesse himself, because word on the street was Teddy might have had something to do with what happened to Taaz. That contract dispute? Everybody knew about it. So when she was taken out, a lot of folks automatically started connecting dots. And then there was Teddy's reaction. His road manager, Henry Evans, straight up said something felt off. Like instead of being heartbroken, Teddy seemed relieved.
The look that I got from both of them, I was like, this is not right. Instead of feeling some kind of regret, I'm looking at somebody that's feeling relieved. Like,
Oh, and about Taaz being the love of his life? If that was the case, he sure moved on fast. And not just casually. He was out here entertaining women left and right. And not just from the stage, if you catch my drift. Now, did people think he actually pulled the trigger? Not necessarily. But plenty suspected he made a phone call to some very dangerous people and made sure she was gone.
Teddy was hanging with the Black Mafia. Teddy was hooked up with a friend of mine who was the killer.
Word is, some very dangerous people were not fans of how much control Taaz had over Teddy. The local crew saw him as their hometown star, and they weren't too happy about her running the show. Some of them were even tight with Teddy and felt like she was killing the fun. No partying, no women, just business, and they weren't feeling that. Then, not long after she was gone, Teddy started living it up, and guess what he was using? The same production company Taaz built for him. That money? Yeah, it was now funding everything she had put a stop to. Bottles, smoke, coke, women. Whatever Teddy and his circle wanted, they had it. That contract that once had him locked down, gone. Now, if he wanted it, he got it. Teddy went on to have a very successful career, and we'll come back to the career he had. But there was an accident we should talk about first, one many think might be karma. Remember, some people think Teddy might have been behind Taaz's death, so they think the accident might be karma, if you believe in that sort of thing. Right before hitting 32, Teddy Pendergrass went through something that completely flipped his world upside down. He even opened up about it in his book, Truly Blessed, and honestly, it's something that stuck with him ever since. That night, he was out at Club Elan with his friend Ietja, doing what he did best, enjoying life and turning heads. That's when Tanika Watson walked up. Teddy kinda remembered her from back in the day, but what he didn't know was that she had transitioned a few years earlier. As the night went on, Ietja had to call it early since she had work the next morning. Teddy, being the smooth operator he was, offered to drop her off and even invited Tanika along, saying he'd bring her back later. Tanika later talked about how she wasn't even sure what to make of it at first. Seeing a guy pull up in a Rolls Royce, she assumed he was some big-time hustler, but Teddy was just like, "I'm heading out too. Wanna come?" So she went. After dropping Ietja off, Teddy and Tanika drove back through the city. They were on Lincoln Drive, a road that's basically a nightmare with all its sharp turns, when things took a terrifying turn. Out of nowhere, the brakes on Teddy's Rolls Royce gave out. He lost control, and the car slammed into a tree. Teddy took the worst of it. His neck was broken, leaving him paralyzed from the chest down. Tanika, on the other hand, walked away with barely a scratch, and just like that, the rumors started flying. People couldn't wrap their heads around how Teddy ended up so badly hurt while Tanika was mostly fine. Some even went as far as to suggest that maybe the whole thing wasn't just an accident. After the crash, Tanika tried reaching out to Teddy, but it was a no-go. At one point, she got frustrated and snapped, saying, "Well, you're not gonna see him before his son does," before storming off. Then things got even messier. Investigators found out someone had messed with the car's brakes, which meant this wasn't just some freak accident. Teddy ended up taking Rolls-Royce to court and won. But that only made people ask more questions. Who had it out for him? Was it just bad luck, or was someone actually trying to take him out? Teddy wasn't even supposed to be driving that night. His license was suspended because of unpaid parking tickets. And as if things couldn't get any weirder, it turned out his other cars had been messed with too. Just a week before, he had a small crash in his Maserati. The whole thing had him stressed, and he even started wondering if the cops were involved, since he had sued them for harassment before. It's crazy to think about where he could have gone from there. He was right on the edge of something huge, and then, just like that, everything changed. People started asking, was he living too fast? Pushing his luck? Like so many stars before him? Or was it karma? Or he just didn't have Taaz around to be a parent and make sure he keeps bad decisions to a minimum? After the accident, things got dark for him. He fell into depression, completely lost the confidence that made him who he was, and even considered ending it all. And to make things worse, the music world moved on without him. Fans who once couldn't get enough of him were suddenly obsessed with Marvin Gaye's new hit, and Teddy felt like he was fading into the background, unsure if he'd ever make a comeback. That must have been hard. I mean, we're talking about a guy in his prime. The world was his oyster. Teddy was so loved, especially by the ladies, he had women-only shows. See, Teddy wasn't just an R&B star, he was the ladies' man, and he knew it. So much so that he took things up a notch and made his concerts a full-on fantasy, opening the doors only for women. Yep, men weren't even allowed. It was a genius move that locked in his spot as the guy women couldn't get enough of. At these shows, the energy was insane. Women showed up looking like they were about to meet their dream man, screaming his name, throwing lingerie on stage, and just straight up melting at every deep voice note he sang. And Teddy? He played right into it, making every woman in the crowd feel like she was the only one in the room. But not everyone was on board with his whole ladies-only thing. Some people thought he was boxing himself in, like he was leaning too hard into the heartthrob image, instead of showing everything he could do as an artist. Others saw it as a straight-up money grab, a way to sell records and pack venues, without really pushing his music in new directions.
I don't love you anymore.
What had happened was after Teddy came out swinging with his debut album, the success was instant. His disco banger, I Don't Love You Anymore, had everybody on the dance floor. And the whole town's laughing at me kept the momentum going with an R&B hit.
Maybe then you still be mine.
Even the deep cuts, like You Can't Hide From Yourself, The More I Get, The More I Want, and the slow jam And If I Had people hooked. Didn't waste any time dropping his next project, and this one took things even further. Only You was a hit, but it was Close the Door that made him the guy in soul music.
Girl, it's me and you now.
That song was everywhere, and just to keep things interesting, he threw in the disco jam. Get up, get down, get funky, get loose, the smooth ballad, It Don't Hurt Now.
Baby, it don't hurt now. No, not now.
And the feel-good track, When Somebody Loves You Back.
Love is somebody, and that somebody loves you back.
At this point, Teddy was untouchable. His next album sat at the top of the R&B charts for weeks, and the hits just kept coming. Come Go With Me, the steamy Turn Off the Lights, and Do Me had fans completely in their feelings. With his concerts selling out and his image locked in, he decided to switch things up a bit on his next album, going for a more laid-back sound. That one gave us Love TKO, a duet with Stephanie Mills on Feel the Fire, and the Ashford and Simpson penned Is It Still Good to You. For years, Teddy was on a winning streak that no other R&B artist could touch. Album after album, platinum after platinum. He was making history and doing it effortlessly. By the late 70s, Teddy Pendergrass wasn't just popular, he was the moment. Every show was packed, and his manager, Shep Gordon, couldn't help but notice something. The audience was mostly women, and they were obsessed. So, he came up with an idea that changed the game. Concerts just for the ladies. It was a bold move, but it paid off big time, setting a trend that still happens today. With stacks of platinum and gold records, Teddy wasn't just an R&B star. People were calling him the Black Elvis. He wasn't just selling music, he was selling a lifestyle. And to prove it, he bought himself a mansion that had serious Graceland energy, right near his hometown in Philly. By the early 80s, Teddy was running the R&B game. He was on the same level as Marvin Gaye, outshining Barry White and making other artists step up their game. The Isley Brothers even dropped Don't Say Goodnight, It's Time for Love, as a direct response to his hit Turn Off the Lights. That's how much of a force he was. Teddy didn't just make love songs. He owned the whole slow jam scene. So, Love it or hate it, Teddy knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't just sing to women, he made them feel wanted. And whether that was an artistic choice or a marketing play, one thing was clear: he had the game on lock. So you can imagine how hard coming to terms with this new reality must have been for him. Teddy's big comeback was one of those moments. He hit the stage at Live Aid in Philly, marking his first time performing since the accident, and the energy was unreal. In front of nearly 100,000 people and millions watching from home, he teamed up with Ashford and Simpson to sing Diana Ross's Reach Out and Touch Somebody's Hand. When he told the crowd, "I am truly grateful to be here today, and I want you to know I feel your love," you knew it was straight from the heart. Later that year, he dropped Working It Back, proving he wasn't done yet. But just when things were looking up, life threw another curveball. While driving a special van, he crashed into a telephone pole, leaving him seriously hurt with internal injuries. He had to go into surgery to figure out how bad it was, but giving up was never in his DNA. He kept making music, and when he dropped Joy, the title track shot straight to #1 on the R&B charts for 2 weeks. A few years later, he put out A Little More Magic, but by the late 90s, he started pulling back from the spotlight and working behind the scenes. He also put his life story in a book, Truly Blessed, before stepping away from the public eye for health reasons. In 2009, he went through surgery for colon cancer and seemed to be recovering until things suddenly took a turn. Just weeks later, he started having trouble breathing and had to be rushed back to the hospital. After months of fighting, he passed away at 59.